Okay, so this piece offers a really solid, biblically grounded take on figures like Walsh and Cooper, calling them out for pushing unity with the far right and, well, not holding allies like Candace Owens accountable, using Proverbs 27 as the basis for that public rebuke.
Yeah, that Proverbs foundation is strong. It immediately sets a high bar. But let's jump right into the first point of critique. The core argument itself is powerful, drawing on two really crucial but separate biblical ideas. Rejecting unity with those holding different values, the whole unequally yoked thing, and then also demanding open critique from friends, like faithful are the wounds of a friend.
Right, two distinct concepts.
Exactly. But the material tends to, blend them together sometimes. And that mixing, it kind of dilutes the punch because it muddies the water on what the specific error is.
I did notice that drift. It feels like sometimes the writer's talking about why you just can't unite with people holding frankly abhorrent views. Nazism, white supremacy, anti-Jewish ideas. That's one thing. That's the moral line.
That's the unequally yoked boundary. Yeah, non-negotiable.
But then it shifts, sometimes in the same breath, to why specific friends, people like Brett Cooper or maybe Megyn Kelly, are wrong because they aren't publicly calling out Candace Owens.
And while those things are related, integrity connects them, mixing that fundamental moral boundary, who you even can align with the relational behavior, what you owe a friend, it makes it tougher for the listener to really pinpoint the precise failure for each person mentioned.
Yeah, you're left wondering, okay, is Matt Walsh's main issue here that he's bad at friendship loyalty? Or is it the much bigger problem of fundamentally aligning with views that are just completely out of balance?
Exactly. And if we don't separate those, the critique loses some of its surgical precision.
Okay, so clarity and structure is the...
Right. So the suggestion for improvement is pretty straightforward. Structure the piece to clearly tackle these two complaints separately. First, really hammer home the philosophical rejection. Why unity with the alt-right or radical right, whatever term you use, is fundamentally impossible based on core values not aligning. That's the biblical line in the sand.
That feels like the strongest part of the argument anyway, that moral clarity. It deserves its own space.
Totally agree. And then, as a distinct second point, address the necessity of applying that open rebuke standard within existing friendships on the right. This becomes about relational duty, about integrity in relationship.
That way the audience gets the high standard being set for both political alliances and personal friendships. Two clear takeaways.
Precisely. It makes the whole argument much cleaner, much more strategically sound.
So, for actually implementing this, it means treating, say, Matt Walsh's error and Brett Cooper's error as different kinds of violations, right?
Exactly. So when discussing Walsh, the focus should be squarely on his call for unity with people who, from a biblical standpoint, just don't even share the same values with us. Frame it as crossing that primary moral threshold.
Okay, that's the big picture, foundational error.
Yes, and then when the focus shifts to someone like Brett Cooper, the error isn't necessarily about her sharing those awful views she might not, but about a failure of, let's call it, relational integrity, a failure to live out that Proverbs command.
And maybe contrast her approach, like the piece does, with the example of Brandon Tatum and his wife, Corinne. They maintain the relationship, but still call out the horrible, hateful sentiment towards Jews, or the disgusting words from Charlie Kirk.
Perfect. That contrast works beautifully. It shows the standard isn't necessarily immediate disavowal, but it is open accountability. Separating the philosophical rejection from the friendship duty gives the listener two really distinct, powerful benchmarks for what conservative integrity should look like.
Okay, that definitely sharpens the first critique. Let's move on to the second big area. The piece does a great job arguing the ultimate solution is Jesus, urging conservatives to humble ourselves at the foot of the cross daily, which is, profoundly true.
Absolutely true. But, and this is a big but, it kind of misses a key step. It doesn't quite translate that vital theological truth into the kind of concrete, actionable political roadmap that it rightly demands from people like Matt Walsh.
I see the disconnect. There's a demand for a practical plan from others.
Right. The writer explicitly challenges Walsh, explain the plan. How are you going to unite with these people? And argues conservatism won't win without changing course. They're asking for a political strategy.
But the alternative offered is primarily spiritual. Jesus is the only one that is going to help solve these problems.
Which, again, is the ultimate truth. But it's presented more as the destination than the vehicle to get there. you know? It leaves this strategic vacuum right where the piece is demanding a clear plan.
So if you're in a political debate and you slam your opponent for lacking a strategy, but your counter is essentially trust Jesus, while true, it might sound a bit abstract, maybe even politically naive to some listeners.
Exactly. It risks sounding disengaged from the practical fight. The weakness isn't the solution itself. Christ is the answer. It's the failure to articulate the process. How does that ultimate solution inform our actions right now in the public square?
Okay, so the suggestion isn't to change the core message, but to operationalize it.
Precisely. Operationalize the Christ-centric focus. Define the principles derived from faith that should govern public political action. That way, you're offering a practical, principled alternative strategy that's actually rooted in the values the writer champions.
How does focusing on Jesus translate into, say, legislative priorities or alliance-building criteria this year? That's the missing piece.
Right. And the material itself gives us the clues. It mentions Jesus would be loving, kind, use logic, use facts, use reason, not necessarily emotion.
Okay, yeah, those characteristics are listed.
So the step forward is to take those characteristics and build them into an explicit model for biblically sound political engagement. Don't just list logic and facts. Explain how a strategy prioritizing truth-seeking over just winning rhetorically looks in practice.
Or if Jesus is loving and kind, how does that translate to engaging opponent? Does it mean never being harsh, or does it mean something else? Define it.
Exactly. It becomes a behavioral blueprint derived from those virtues, not just a list of admirable traits.
This feels critical. If the core critique is that Walsh lacks a viable plan, the only really effective counter is a better plan built on a higher standard.
And that operational plan has to connect back to the first point, too. It needs to detail how avoiding being unequally yoked translates into concrete political red lines.
Okay, so you need to spell out these specific beliefs, maybe explicit white supremacy, overt anti-Semitism are absolute deal breakers for any kind of political cooperation. Full stop.
Yes, even if you share a common enemy, like the left, you cannot make common cause if the foundation is morally rotten. That has to be explicit policy.
So the piece could actually propose a kind of policy statement. Our conservative strategy is guided by these Christ-like principles, logic, kindness, truth, and our commitment to biblical separation means any alliance dissolves the instant these moral red lines are crossed.
That closes the strategy gap perfectly. It makes the Christ-centric alternative feel much more tangible, much more politically relevant, and, frankly, more compelling. It makes faith strategic.
Okay, that really strengthens the piece's core argument. Now, for the third piece of feedback, this one's maybe a bit more creative. It's about taking that powerful idea of open rebuke and using it differently.
Right now, it's used mostly reactively, right? To criticize people like Cooper or Kelly when they failed to rebuke a friend. It's about accountability after the fact.
Yeah, it's framed as a failure of friendship.
But what if we flip that? What if open rebuke is better than secret love isn't just a standard for existing friends, but becomes a tactical prerequisite for forming any potential alliance in the first place?
Okay, go on.
Well, right now the argument feels a bit like a binary choice. Either you fully unite and compromise your values, which is what Walsh is accused of leaning towards, or you reject the far right completely and risk strategic isolation, which makes it hard to fight common enemies.
Right, it presents this dilemma. Compromise integrity or compromise effectiveness?
And the writer clearly values integrity above all, but they likely also see the need for some level of conservative unity against the left. This binary framing kind of overlooks a third way. What if the act of committing to open rebuke is the only acceptable basis for working together?
So you're saying you make accountability the price of admission for any alliance?
Pretty much. The suggestion is to introduce this idea. Let's call it a rebuke-first alliance. Argue that the only biblically sound way to pursue unity against the left is by making continuous, public, loving accountability, those faithful wounds, the explicit, non-negotiable term of engagement from the outset.
Wow, that takes serious guts politically. You're basically telling potential allies up front, look, I'll work with you on shared goal, but part of the deal is I reserve the right, actually the duty, to publicly call you out if you say something that violates core biblical principles.
That's exactly the point. The writer is advocating for a higher standard of conservatism, one where biblical integrity trumps political calculation.
So if a potential ally balks at those terms,
Then they've just proven the writer's original critique, haven't they? They value secrecy or political expediency over truth and accountability, which means they weren't truly aligned on principle to begin with. It turns the whole strategy into a kind of moral litmus test.
I really like that. It reframes integrity not as something that prevents unity, but as the actual condition for principled unity.
Yeah. So the piece could actually propose a model statement the commentator themselves could adopt. Something like, I'm willing to align with fellow conservatives against the dangers of the left. However, my primary loyalty is to God, not man. Therefore, any unity I offer comes with an ironclad guarantee. Immediate, public, but loving rebuke for any idea pushed that contradicts biblical truth, like hating Jewish people or promoting white supremacy.
And the source material actually provides a real-world hint of this already. It mentions Charlie Kirk, right? How he stayed friends with Candace Owens, but still called her out on the big stage on certain issues.
Exactly. That Kirk example, even if imperfect, serves as a template. It shows it's possible to maintain some form of alliance while still prioritizing public accountability. The key is making that accountability an upfront, transparent part of the deal.
Okay, so it's not just about reacting to error, it's about building the expectation of correction into the relationship itself.
Precisely. It elevates the commentator's position from just being a critic to being an architect of a potentially better, more principled form of conservative engagement.
This has been really productive. It feels like we've taken a piece that was already strong in its convictions and found ways to make its structure and strategy just as strong. The theological core is solid.
Definitely. So just to quickly recap the main actionable points for the writer. First, really sharpen the structure by clearly separating the two core arguments: the moral reasons for not uniting, the unequally yoked line, and the relational duty to rebuke friends, faithful wounds. Don't let them blur together.
Right. Boundary versus duty. Got it. Second, take that vital Christ-centric solution and build it out into a concrete political strategy. Use those characteristics, logic, reason, kindness, to define how a biblically minded conservative engages politically, including defining those non-negotiable red lines for alliances. Give it practical teeth.
Yep. And finally, consider reframing open rebuke. Don't just use it to critique past failures. Propose it as a proactive, upfront condition for any future alliance. That rebuke-first alliance model offers a unique path to principled unity.
The passion and biblical grounding are clearly there. These adjustments are really about maximizing the impact of that conviction. If you do incorporate these suggestions, we'd love to see the revised piece. Feel free to submit it again for another look.